Today, we're going to look at the teams that were eliminated from the postseason. Here is the off-season preview for the teams that were bounced wildcard weekend. All right, of the teams that were knocked out, again, we're going to go kind of chronologically here based on when they were eliminated. And we're going to start with the Carolina Panthers. They are going to have the 19th overall pick in the draft and around $25 million in salary cap space. This was obviously a year of growth for Carolina, and they're an interesting team to look at here offseason wise, because on the one hand, won the division, made the playoffs, showed very good growth and improvement, and showed that they have a lot to be excited about. On the other hand, they were 8-9, and when you look at some of the secondary stats, they were basically in the 20s of everything offensively when you're looking at EPA per pass, EPA per rush, success rate, all those things. They were still in the bottom third of the league in a lot of those categories. It was wildly inconsistent and not necessarily deserving of a spot in the playoffs, despite them actually playing in the postseason. So on the one hand, yay, development, but on the other hand, let's not look at anything on this team and be, oh, well, we couldn't improve on that. Look what we have. That being said, there are pieces that you like. I think skill position wise, they're okay. Bryce Young at least showed enough that he is worth sticking around with, and you don't need to cut bait and roll like it may have looked a couple of seasons ago. I like the running back situation there. I think Chuba Hubbard did show on wildcard weekend that he is the better of the running backs, but a pretty good two-headed monster out there. And I like the receiving room. McMillan is going to keep growing. Xavier Legette feels like a really, really strong kind of deep threat. And Coker has developed into a pretty solid option as well. I would like something a little bit more reliable on like 3rd and 7, but I don't think you need to spend a lot of time or off-season resources on that necessarily. Maybe an improvement at tight end. I didn't put that on here, but maybe something there to just get something a little bit more reliable for your young quarterback in some of those medium to long third downs there. But I think the big need for this team is on the interior of the offensive line. You have a small quarterback. There's no getting around it. We can do Marcus Stroman, height doesn't measure heart, and we can do, well, look at all these small quarterbacks who've been able to produce. The fact is, when dude is making a throw and the pocket's around him, it looks like he almost has to jump first to make the throw. He's been successful at times at doing it, but you can see, like, he almost stands up on his tippy toes every time he's throwing the football. So you need some work on the interior of this line to give him some more passing lanes. Because when you had kind of the C's part for him, and he's able to just rip it, the dude's got an arm. And he is a quality quarterback. So it's the NFL. You're not just going to have the C's open up 50 times a game. But you do need a little bit more strength on the interior of that O-line. They're going to be drafting 19. There could be something there. That might be more a day 2 or a day 3 thing. The other thing I think they do need to improve on is the pass rush. It got better from the previous season to this one, but there's still a lot of work to be done. I think that's probably where they address things in the draft at 19 on day 1 is someone that can get to the quarterback. Interior of the offensive line, that is something I think you can address in free agency. So they're in a decent spot. They would be an interesting Kyle Pitts team for me. Maybe you want something a little bit more reliable than that, but an interesting spot for Carolina. And one that I think they could be a legitimate playoff team come this time next season. The Green Bay Packers, up next. They will not be drafting in the first round unless they make another move, as that pick was traded to the Dallas Cowboys. They come into this offseason with negative $37 million in salary cap space. This team was a Super Bowl contender for a reason, but again, this team is eliminated now for a reason. And so there aren't a whole lot of places where it's like, oh my God, fix this right now. But there are also, again, aren't a lot of spots where it's no. We're good. We're set. We're all checked here. Quarterback, you're fine with Love. The receiving room, that's the biggest need for me, is decisions at receiver and on the offensive line. They have a decision to make as Dobbs is a free agent. Let's focus on the receiving room for a second. It's been great that they have all this talent because everyone gets hurt on this team. But they have all this talent at wide receiver, but you kind of need a guy You know, you need that. We've seen with Kansas City, Baltimore, Buffalo, all those spots. When it comes down to it, you need that guy. And Jacob said it going into last offseason that they kind of needed a number one. I still think Christian Watson can be that if my guy can stay healthy at all. Golden had a very big playoff game, and it's big enough that I would almost prefer you just let Dobbs walk. I know he's probably the more reliable of the big four they have at receiver, but I feel like you kind of got to let him walk, let Golden develop, and kind of let that group do what it does. So I think they need a little bit of clarity there, and they need to figure out what the offensive line situation is, as Rasheed Walker, their left tackle, is a pending free agent. As we said, they don't got a ton of cap space to be able to try to keep him with. It's the NFL. You can juggle that around as much as you want. But do they keep him around, or is that something they address in the draft or in free agency? But that is going to be a very big spot for them, I think, is figuring out what they're going to do on the offensive line and specifically at left tackle. In terms of ways to just improve the roster they have now, I think you did see in that game against the Bears and throughout the season, there's some secondary help that is needed. It was great at the beginning of the year when Micah Parsons is breaking through, getting to the quarterback, making some of those big plays. Your secondary, it's a little bit easier when there is a pass rush that is relentless and they only have to cover for 2, 3, 4, 5 seconds. But when that pass rush isn't getting home, this defense was getting picked apart a little bit. So I do think they need a little bit of help there in the secondary. Probably because of the move they made to bring Parsons in, they probably do need some help on the interior of the defensive line as well and getting in the run-stopping department. But this team is a couple of tweaks away from being right back there and playing this weekend instead of figuring out what is next for their organization. The Jacksonville Jaguars are up next. Again, a team that will not be picking in the first round unless other moves are made, as they traded that pick to the Cleveland Browns. They have negative $10.1 million in salary cap space. My number one need for them, and it's not going to be one that I think is addressed, is a true number one wide receiver. This receiving room is actually pretty talented with the acquisition of Jacoby Myers. Washington showed that he can be a pretty solid pickup as well. Travis Hunter was just kind of getting going before he got hurt. And Brian Thomas would be the one that you would slot in as that true number one wide receiver, except he didn't look like it at any point this season. So he either needs to step up and be that guy now consistently, or they need to clear him out and bring in someone who can. And like Jacoby Myers, I have never liked him as much as everyone else likes him. I think he's a really, really good number two, but I don't think he is that number one guy that is going to go out and beat teams in a competitive AFC. Hunter, again, could end up being that. Thomas has the talent to, but it seems like there is some frustration going on there. So they need one of those guys to figure it out. Hunter is staying. Myers just signed that contract. If anyone's moving on, it's probably Thomas. So we'll see what they end up doing there. But again, like this was a talented football team this year. There's a reason why a lot of people picked them against Buffalo in that AFC wildcard game, and it came down to a very well executed tush push that gets the Bills into the next round. Looking at the stats, I was like, this team's kind of set. But you look at the stats, they're still middle of the pack in a lot of the secondary offensive categories that I look at that I feel like are pretty important to success. So that's why I was looking for a receiver for this team, because it feels like there is still a touch of an improvement that can happen with the pass catching unit with Jacksonville. Defensively, maybe some help on the interior of the defensive line. You have a really good pass rush with those guys and just a really solid team in general. Maybe a little bit more help in the run-stopping department could really round out this defense. But again, Jacksonville, for the first time in a really long time, is looking at an offseason where it's just kind of tinkering around the edges to try to find some subtle improvements to raise that ceiling a little bit higher instead of oh my God, what are we going to do with this football team? So a pretty good spot for Jacksonville to be heading into the offseason in. The Philadelphia Eagles are next. They already made one of their big moves of the offseason, firing their offensive coordinator. They have negative $1.1 million in cap space. Obviously, like, they have a lot of decisions that need to be made. But when you look at this Eagles team, the reason why there's so much frustration around how this season went is because this is a good football team. So honestly, better offensive play calling, and I think you're in a really, really good spot going forward. The A.J. Brown situation, that needs to get sorted. That can't be a distraction again, because you could feel it this year. I said before, they felt like they were going into games either trying to prove people wrong or to make A.J. Brown happy, much to the detriment of their football team. So either he needs to like get on the same page as everyone else, or he needs to get gone. I said before, I meant to make this reference on the show, but didn't quite get to it. He feels like a Raider, right? Like that feels like an old school, what Al Davis would do. Like, oh, you have a disgruntled number one wide receiver? We're bringing him in because Jamarcus Russell's a good quarterback and Lane Kiffin's a good coach. That feels like a move that the Raiders of the past would end up doing. And look, that'd be a pretty good receiver for what we presume to be a number one pick at quarterback, although we'll talk about that later on in the stream. But they need to get that part figured out. The other thing that needs to get solved here is depth on the offensive line. Lane Johnson, there's a lot of will he, won't he in terms of coming back. Even if he does, you don't want to be going into next season with that. They did a pretty good job of backfilling behind Kelsey, and they've been able to replace a lot of guys on the offensive line that have moved on, like guys like Becton and all of that. They're going to need another one now, and it's tough to just draft a Lane Johnson replacement, but you kind of need to. There is going to need to be something backfilled there to get some depth because they were finally not fully healthy on the O-line, and that really did set some things back for them this year. They're drafting at 23. There could be some offensive line help that is there as well. They do have decisions to make. Some pretty big pieces are going to be free agents. Nakobe Dean, Jalen Phillips, and Reed Blankenship. Blankenship really struggled in the game against San Francisco. Dean is so solid and would be one of the best defensive players on most teams in the NFL. Kind of same with Phillips. They have a lot of talent on the defensive side of the football. They've drafted there really well. And quite frankly, if a couple of pieces leave and you maybe have a couple of holes, every team does, they're not going to be understanding about that. But I wonder if all of those end up leaving. Dean would be the one that I would focus on trying to bring back the most. Blankenship, that was a rough go, and maybe you try to find a replacement there. Phillips, I think is solid, but Dean feels like one you really don't want to let go. And that would be a huge player to add to a number of different teams. So they have decisions to make there, and then maybe a little bit of help in the secondary, especially if Blankenship is on his way out. But again, a pretty good group of corners. It's just, again, it's a really good roster. It's a really good roster. You're just either filling in for a couple of guys who might be leaving or adding some depth to protect against injuries. But better play calling, better vibes, weird is it to say, but better vibes, and better results for the Eagles in 2026. Because again, the roster is silly good in Philly. The LA Chargers are next. One of the first teams that we're going to talk about with real cap space, as they have $94 million to spend. They'll be drafting 22nd overall in the draft, or at least that's the pick they hold right now. They're another one that you watch how the season plays out, and it's like, okay, well, the need is obvious, and it's the offensive line. But if all the offensive linemen are healthy, they're set. Right? Like if Alt and Slater are good, this is a pretty solid offensive line that they have going for them. So I don't think you need to trade up in the draft to try to get the best offensive lineman or the best tackle or anything. But some depth wouldn't be the worst thing, even though like it was a lot of injuries, but you could see that some of those depth pieces weren't it. So let's see if we can get some guys who could be. I do think there's genuine need to help out on the interior of the offensive line. Like that is a part that just needs to be upgraded. And then defensively on the D-line, getting a little old and not being able to get to the quarterback as often as maybe they would like. So that is an area that I think they could get a little bit more athletic in and a little bit more talented in on the defensive line. So some trenches stuff is on the wish list for the LA Chargers heading into this offseason. And then the most discussed team over the last week or so, and that's the Pittsburgh Steelers. $29.9 million in salary cap space. They need a coach, and they need a lot of help. This was one of the things we talked about when discussing the Tomlin firing. This is not a great roster. And it feels like Tomlin is being punished for dragging subpar rosters into the postseason and then having predictable results with them. They need a quarterback. I think you need another wide receiver. This offense was very limited when DK Metcalf went out and shoved a fan in the last 2 days or last 2 games of the regular season there. And they need help on the defense. That secondary's good. That's a good secondary that they have. But TJ Watt can't be the only one who's getting after the passer on a consistent basis. They need some help in the front seven. So quarterback, you're right around where Simpson is on big boards, but I don't know if he's going to be available at quarterback for them there. Wide receiver, you can probably find something at that part, and then defense, that this team has generally been okay about finding some defensive players, but they haven't been great over the last couple of seasons. So this is like $29.9 million. They're going to be able to do some stuff, but they have done so much of just trying to plug the holes, and those are starting to break as well. It feels like a bigger reset is probably needed in Pittsburgh, but they haven't done that the entire time I've been alive. So I don't know if that's going to be the way they do it. I'm very, very intrigued to see how Pittsburgh attacks this offseason. So what did you guys think? Is there an obvious need that I have missed? Is there something that I'm overstating with what these teams are looking for? Let me know either in the comments or in the chat if you are watching this live, and we can keep that football conversation going. We are streaming this on a few different platforms over on YouTube, Kick, and on twitch.tv/primetimepk. Right now we got the discount on gifted subs, 35% off, 5 gifted subs. Right now that is going to Sunday morning. So check that one out if you are heading over to twitch.tv/primetimepk. The next stream that we're going to be doing, unless Kyle Tucker signs after the stream today, but the next one that is scheduled is going to be 10 a.m. Mountain Time on Friday. So a rare Friday stream from me on Twitch, Kick, and over on YouTube.